She arrived with scars she never mentioned. He never asked. The gate latch was cold that morning. I remember that. October, and the frost had come early, and I was standing in the yard trying to get the south pasture gate to sit right again after the wind had warped it off its post, and I had my gloves off because you can't feel what you're doing with gloves on, and the iron was cold enough to sting. That's where I was when I first saw her. She came up the creek road, which wasn't the road anyone used. The main road from Harlan came from the north. The creek road was a half-mile longer and it went through the willows and the mud, and you only took it if you were coming from somewhere you didn't want to name, or if you didn't know the country well enough to know there was a better way. She was one or the other, maybe both. She had a gray horse, sound-looking animal, and a bedroll tied behind the saddle, and a canvas bag on the left side that was worn near through at the stitching. That was all she had. She pulled up maybe 30 feet short of where I was standing, and she just sat there a moment, taking stock of the place the way a person does when they're not sure if what they're riding toward is better or worse than what they left. The horse was tired but steady, not blowing, which told me she'd stopped somewhere in the night and not pushed the last stretch. A person in real panic doesn't think about the horse. I didn't say anything. I went back to the gate. The upper hinge pin had worked loose from the post, and I was trying to drive it back in with a rock, which was a poor tool for the job but the only one in reach. I heard her walk the horse closer. "You got a hammer," she said, not asking it like a question. I looked up. Up close she was younger than I'd thought from across the yard, and older at the same time, the way some women are, the kind of old that doesn't have anything to do with years. Brown hair coming loose from under a hat that had seen hard weather. Eyes that were taking everything in without making a show of it. Steady eyes. She was reading me the way I was reading her, and she wasn't hiding the fact. There was something wrong with her left hand, I could see that much. The way she held the reins, more weight on the right, the left fingers not quite closing all the way. "Barn," I said. She got down, looped the reins over the fence rail, went into the barn without being told where it was, came back with a hammer and a handful of the right-sized nails that she must have found by looking, not by asking me. She handed me the hammer and the nails and stood back. I got the hinge seated and drove the pin home and checked the gate. It swung right. "Thank you," I said. "Is there work here?" I looked at her again. She wasn't looking for permission. She wasn't nervous about asking. She was just asking the way a man asks, flat and waiting for the answer. My wife had been gone 4 years. I had the ranch, 2,200 acres and a horse operation, and a hay field that I put up alone every summer, and cattle I moved alone every fall, and a house that was cleaner than it looked from the outside but not by much. I was 56 years old. My back hurt in cold weather. I had a loose cinch ring on my good saddle that I'd been meaning to fix for 6 weeks. I had a list of things that needed doing that was longer every spring than it had been the spring before, because each year I was 60 seconds older than I'd been, and the land didn't know that and didn't care. "Some," I said. "I can cook, I can mend, I'm good with horses." She paused. "I'm not asking for charity." "Didn't say you were." "I'll work for room and board until we figure out what fair wages are." I thought about that not long. There's a room off the kitchen, used to be a hired man's room. It's got a cot and a window and a stove hookup but no stove. I can find a stove. I can sleep without one. "Not in November, you can't." She didn't answer that. She looked at the barn, at the house, at the far pasture where 3 horses were standing in the thin morning sun. Her eyes stopped there. Something in her face settled just slightly, like a breath let out. Whatever she'd been braced for, this wasn't it. "All right," she said. Her name was Della. She told me that first day and nothing else, and I didn't press. A man gets to a certain age. He stops needing to know everything about a person to understand the important things. She worked. She was honest. She didn't take anything that wasn't offered. She was good with horses in a way that isn't taught, the kind of thing that's either in a person or it isn't, a quality that some people spend years trying to develop and some people just come into the world with. Those were the important things. I found a stove, traded a saddle blanket and half a day's work to a man in Harlan who had one sitting in his equipment shed that he'd taken off someone's hands 3 years ago and hadn't gotten around to doing anything with. I loaded it in the wagon myself, hauled it home, put it in the room, ran the pipe through the wall, sealed it with clay, and by the second week of October the room off the kitchen was warm enough. She said nothing about it. But the next morning there was a pan of cornbread on the kitchen table when I came in from feeding, and it was still hot, and there was a cloth over it to hold the warmth, and that was her way of saying something without saying it, which turned out to be very much her way. We found a rhythm the way you do when two people are practical and neither one is looking to make things complicated. She took the morning feeding and the house. I took the afternoon pasture work and the horse's feet and the fence line. She had supper ready when I came in. I did the dishes. I'd always done the dishes. Margaret had hated doing dishes, and I'd taken the habit and kept it. The first time Della saw me doing them, she tried to take over and I just shook my head and kept going, and after that she let it be. Evenings I sat by the fire with whatever needed mending or reading. She sat at the kitchen table. Sometimes she sewed. Sometimes she just sat there with her hands around a cup of tea and looked out the window at the dark. I didn't try to talk at her during those times. A quiet house is not an empty house. I'd learned that from living in one too long, the difference between quiet from absence and quiet from someone else being in a room doing their own thing. One sits on you like weight. The other just sits. The hand, I didn't ask about the hand. I could see it was old damage, not new. The scar tissue ran from the knuckle of her index finger to her wrist, a thick white line that deepened at the wrist, where it had the particular look of something that had healed wrong, without proper care. The ring finger and the pinky didn't close all the way. When she did close work, mending, or the small buckles on a bridle, she would hold things differently than you'd expect, working from the thumb and the middle two fingers, and she developed a kind of workaround that was almost elegant, the efficiency of someone who'd had years to solve the problem. She'd long since made her accommodations. It wasn't my business. She didn't ask about anything either. That was the thing I noticed early. She was in my house, moving through my life, and she didn't ask any of the questions most people would ask. Didn't ask about Margaret. Didn't ask about the photograph on the mantel. Didn't ask why there was a boy's saddle still hanging in the barn, child-sized, that I hadn't been able to move in 9 years. She saw things and she let them be. I didn't know at the time how much of that was courtesy and how much was her own practice, keeping her eyes forward, not looking sideways into places she didn't have permission to be, because she'd learned that the less you asked into someone else's life, the less they'd ask into yours. The first time I understood what she was, what kind of person, was about 3 weeks in. I had a mare named Copper that was in foal and getting close, and she'd been off her feed for 2 days and I was watching her careful. Middle of the night, I heard Della's door open, and I heard her go through the kitchen and out the back, and I lay there a minute listening to the sound of the barn door, and then I got up. When I got to the barn, she was already in the stall with Copper. She'd lit the lantern, turned it low. She was down in the straw with the mare's head in her lap, just talking to her, low and even, not words you could make out, just the sound of a voice saying, "I'm here, I see you, you're all right." I watched from outside the stall. She hadn't heard me. She wasn't performing. She was just there with the horse because the horse needed someone there, and she'd heard it through her sleep the same way I had, which meant she was sleeping light. You sleep light when your body's been trained to expect things coming at you in the dark. I filed that away without deciding what to do with it. I went back inside. I didn't tell her I'd seen. The foal came 3 nights later, clean and right, a bay filly that stood up in an hour and was nursing by 2. Della was there for that too, and I was, and we stood on either side of the stall watching the filly sort out her legs, learning what they were for, and Della had her arms on the top rail and she was smiling. Not at me. Just smiling, the way a person smiles when they're watching something good happen, and they're not thinking about anything except the good thing in front of them. I don't think she even knew she was doing it. I didn't point it out. I said, "Good mare." She said, "Good foal." And that was the whole conversation, and it was enough. What I want to say about the work is that she changed how the place felt. Not by changing anything you could name. The house wasn't different. The yard wasn't different. The horses were the same horses. But a working ranch that's been run by one man too long gets a particular feel to it, a kind of grayness, not unpleasant exactly, just flat. Functional. Things get done because they need doing, and you do them. And then you do the next ones, and the days pass, and it's a life. But it starts to feel more like maintenance than living. You stop caring about the little things because there's no reason to bother with little things when it's just you. Nobody's going to notice. The cornbread was a little thing. The way she put the harness back on its hooks instead of just laying it over the rail was a little thing. The smell of something real cooking when I came in from the cold, every day without fail, was a little thing. The way she sometimes left a candle in the window of the kitchen when I was out after dark. She never mentioned it and I never mentioned it. But I noticed it every time. That small light in the window, that was a little thing. Little things pile up. One morning I came in from feeding and the floor had been swept and the table had been wiped down and the window above the sink had been washed, and none of those things were remarkable by themselves. But I stood there in the kitchen for a moment before I poured my coffee and I thought, this place looks cared for. I hadn't thought that in 4 years. November came hard. We got snow before Halloween, which was early even for that country, and it laid on and didn't melt, and by the second week I was doing the morning feeding in the dark, and the cold had that particular bite that means it means business, the kind that doesn't let go until April. She was always up before me. I don't know when she slept, or if she did really in those first months. I'd come into the kitchen in the dark before 5 and there'd be a fire going in the stove and coffee on, and she'd have already broken the ice on the water troughs and dropped hay for the barn horses. She didn't ask if she was supposed to do those things. She just saw them needing doing and did them. There are men who'd call that a bargain, a good situation, someone to take the load. I thought of it differently. A bargain is a thing made and held to because it serves both parties. What she was doing went past the edge of what I'd offered her. She was doing more than her share, not because she was simple or didn't know better, but because she understood something about what a place like this needed and she responded to it, and she did it without making a show of it. That's a different thing. We got a bad week in mid-November. Ice, then more snow, then a wind off the north that didn't quit for 4 days. The kind of cold that works into the bones of a ranch and finds every weakness, loose shingles, bad door seals, cracked foundation chinking. I spent 2 days up on the barn roof in that wind, renailing shingles that had lifted, and my hands were clumsy by the end of it and I had the cold in my chest by night. I lost 2 calves out on the far range, found them in a draw where they'd tried to shelter. You lose stock in a bad winter, that's ranching. That's been ranching since the first man put a fence around an animal. But it doesn't sit easy regardless. I came in that evening with it all sitting on me, and I didn't talk through supper. After I'd eaten, she set a cup in front of me. Not coffee. Something else, some herb thing she'd found in the dry goods I kept in the back pantry, or maybe she'd had it with her, I didn't know. It smelled like nothing I'd ever been given and I looked at it. "Drink it," she said. "It'll help the cold in your chest." I hadn't said anything about my chest, but I'd been coughing since morning, the deep kind, the kind that gets in and sets up like it owns the place. I drank it. It was bitter and I didn't like it. I drank it all. By morning the cough was half of what it had been, and by the next day it was mostly gone. I didn't thank her. That sounds worse than it was. She wouldn't have wanted me to. She'd done it the same way she did everything, matter of fact, no ceremony, no expectation of gratitude and a formal thank. You would have put a frame around it that neither of us needed. I just drank the thing and was better, and that was how she wanted it. I found out some of what I didn't know about her in December, not because she told me. Because Walt Greer came to the ranch. Walt was the county land agent, not a bad man but not a good one either, the kind of man who does what he's asked because he's been asked nicely, and because doing otherwise creates complications for him personally. He came with a young deputy I didn't know, and they rode into the yard on a cold afternoon when I was splitting wood. I heard them before I saw them, set down the maul, and turned and waited. Walt pulled his horse up and got down and handed the reins to the deputy, and came toward me with his hat in his hands, which was always the sign he wanted something he wasn't sure he was going to get. He said he was looking for a woman named Adela Marsh. I looked at him. He said there'd been an incident in Claremore some months back. He said her husband had died. He said there were questions about the nature of the death, and that the family was asking those questions, and they'd asked the county to help, and here he was. I said I didn't know any Adela Marsh. Walt looked at me for a while. Walt had known me for 20 years, and he knew when I was lying and when I wasn't, or at least he knew when he couldn't be sure. Right now he couldn't be sure. I kept my face exactly where it was, not blank, which looks like hiding, just normal, just a man who's been asked a question and answered it. He said a woman matching a certain description had been seen coming up through this country in October. He said he was making inquiries along the creek road. I said that was probably right, that I'd seen a few folks come through in October same as any year, and I couldn't say I'd caught all their names. He nodded like a man who believed about half of what he was hearing and knew he had no way to do better. He said thank you and put his hat back on, and they rode out. I picked up the maul and finished the wood. A man's got to finish what he starts. Then I went inside. She was at the kitchen table. She'd heard the horses in the yard, I knew that, and she'd stayed in the kitchen, which was the smart thing to do. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, both of them, the good one and the scarred one side by side, and her face was set hard and still, the way a face gets when a person is waiting to hear any version of news and has had to make themselves ready for all of them. I poured 2 cups of coffee and put one in front of her and sat down across from her. I said, land agent, looking for somebody. I told him I didn't know the name. She looked at me, reading me. He seemed to believe it well enough, I said. She was quiet a long time. The fire popped. Outside, the wind moved through the eave and made the sound it always made, a low note like something half asleep. Then she said, the questions about how he died. I waited. He hit me for 6 years, she said. She said it without any particular tone, without any of the wavering that comes when a person's still raw about something. Just information, laid out flat like reading a bill of sale. The last time he did it I fell wrong, hit the stove. My hand caught it on the way down, and then he closed the door on it. She paused for just a moment. When I was on the floor he came at me again, and I got to the fireplace tools and I hit him with the poker. I didn't mean for it to kill him. But he was coming at me, and I wasn't going to die on that floor, and I'm not sure there was a different way for it to go. I drank my coffee. His family has money, she said, and a name. I didn't have either, so I left. I nodded, all right. She looked at me for a moment. That's all you have to say? What else is there to say? She looked down at the coffee cup. Her left hand was there on the table, and she brought her right hand over slowly and covered it, the scarred hand, laid her good hand flat over the one that didn't quite close right anymore. The way you cover something you've been protecting for a long time, and maybe now, maybe, don't have to protect quite so hard. I can leave, she said. It would be better for you if I left. He'll come back, or someone will. Walt Greer comes back, I'll tell him the same thing. He might not come alone. He might not. She was looking at me. I said, this is my land, my gate, my barn, my yard. I say who's on it and who isn't. She didn't say anything. You did what you had to do, I said. I'm not a man who needs more information than that. She turned her face away from me. Not crying, she wasn't a woman who cried, or at least she wasn't going to do it here in front of me, not yet. She looked at the window for a while. Outside the snow was beginning again, soft this time, no wind, the kind of snow that comes straight down and just stays. After a long moment she said, "Why?" A fair question. It deserved a real answer. You came up the creek road in October with one bag and one horse, I said. You found the hammer without being told where it was. You found the right nails. You were up at 3 in the morning sitting in the straw with my mare because she needed someone. You haven't asked me for one thing you didn't earn. I stopped, looked at my coffee. That's not a person who needs to be handed over to anybody. She was looking at me. Besides which, I said, you make better cornbread than I've had in 4 years, so. It was a poor joke and I knew it and she knew it, and she laughed anyway, a short, involuntary sound, like something that got loose before she could catch it, the laugh of a person who'd almost forgotten the mechanics of it. And then the kitchen settled back into its quiet, and the snow came down outside the window, and that was all right. The thing about winter on a ranch is you're trapped together in a way that summer doesn't do. Summer you're spread across the land, work pulling you out in different directions, riding out at dawn, coming back near dark. The day has a natural spread to it that keeps you moving away from the house and back to it. Winter the work is right here, close in, the barn, the wood pile, the kitchen. The same walls, the same lamp in the evening, the same sounds, the same face across the table. Some people can't bear it. Some people discover things about a place and a person they wouldn't have found any other way. I discovered that she sang, not for anyone, not for me. She sang to the horses when she fed them, the same low, wordless sound she'd used with Copper that night in the straw, half tune and half something else, the kind of sound a person makes when they're not quite aware they're making it. I heard it early one morning when I came to the barn unexpected. I'd forgotten my fence pliers and had to turn back, and I stopped outside the barn door and stood there in the cold and listened for a while before going in. The horses stood quiet while she moved through them. It was the most peaceful thing I'd heard in a long time, and I'm a man who values quiet, so that means something. I discovered that she read anything she could get her hands on. There were books on the kitchen shelf, an almanac, Margaret's Bible, 2 or 3 novels that I hadn't looked at in 4 years. Della worked through all of them by December. I knew because I noticed her starting over on the almanac, reading it from the back this time just to have something. I mentioned it the next time I went into Harlan, mentioned it to Everett at the hardware, and he said they'd gotten a box of donated books at the church that nobody'd sorted through and I could have them for $1. I brought home 14 books and left them on the kitchen table without saying anything about them. When I came in from the evening feeding, she was sitting at the table with one of them open, and she looked up at me and something moved in her face, not quite a smile, something quieter and longer lasting than a smile, and she looked back down at the page. I discovered that she was afraid of one specific thing, not loud noises, not strangers, not horses, not the dark, not bad weather. She was steady through all of that, steadier than most. But a door handle moving when she didn't expect it would go through her like a bolt. The first time it happened, she was at the stove and I came in from outside, and the door latch did what it always did in hard, cold, swelled tight, and then gave all at once with a snap, and she spun around with the cast iron pan in her hand before she even knew what she was doing. Standing there with the pan raised and her weight forward and her eyes already doing the calculation, already looking for where to go. She stood like that for just a second, looking at me, taking in that it was me and nothing else, and then she set the pan back on the stove and turned back to what she was cooking without saying a word. I started opening the door slower after that, taking my time, letting the creak of the cold wood announce me before the latch went, giving her time to hear me coming. It cost me nothing. It was a small thing. I did it every time, every day, all winter, and she never mentioned it and I never mentioned it. The thing I noticed, watching her, was that she never asked for anything. Not accommodation, not protection, not understanding. She was a woman who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, who'd learned that needs were liabilities, that wanting things was dangerous. She'd come here and she worked and she did more than her share, and she never asked for anything beyond what I'd offered. I could see it sometimes, the shape of it, the particular way she'd hold back before taking a second cup of coffee, the way she'd start to say something at the table and then not say it, fold it away and go back to eating. Like she was still waiting to find out what the cost was going to be. I thought about that sometimes in the evenings, the way I thought about most things, not at it directly but sideways, the way you look at something far off in bad light, because looking straight on doesn't always show you what you need to see. A person who comes to you already knowing how to work, already knowing to find the hammer and bring the right nails, that person learned it in a place where not contributing meant something bad happened. A person who folds away what they want before they say it out loud learned that wanting things brings trouble. You can't teach a person that. It has to be taught into them over a long time, by someone who had reason to do the teaching. There's a particular kind of anger that's useful and a kind that isn't. The useful kind sharpens you and points you somewhere. The other kind is just burning. I didn't let myself burn over what had been done to her because that was her history and her weight to carry and it wasn't mine to rage at. But I made note of it, the way a man makes note of a thing he means to account for and how he acts going forward. She'd been made to be small. This was my place, and in my place, small wasn't required. One afternoon I came back from a ride to the north fence, and she'd moved the table in the kitchen. Pulled it from the wall so it sat in the middle of the room, where the light from both windows could reach it, and there was space to move around it. She was standing there looking at it when I came in, like she wasn't sure how I was going to take it. I looked at the table in the middle of the room. Better, actually, Margaret had put it against the wall because of the drafts, and the draft seals had been fixed 2 winters ago and I hadn't thought to move the table since. Better light, more room. I said better that way. She nodded, went back to what she was doing. That was December. By January she'd rearranged the harness on the south wall of the barn, hanging it by horse rather than by type, which was more efficient because when you're tacking one horse you're not reaching across to the section for a different one. Made so much sense I couldn't figure out why I hadn't done it years ago. I told her that. She said, "You probably had a reason for how it was." I thought about it, can't remember one. "Then it's better this way," she said. That was how she moved through the place. Not like a woman making herself at home in a man's house. Like a person who was good at what she was good at and applied it without making a show of it, and if you wanted to take it as her taking root, that was up to you to notice. It was January when the 2 men came. Not Walt Greer. 2 men I didn't know, riding good horses, dressed better than you'd expect for the weather and the road. They came from the north, the proper road, which meant someone with information had sent them the right way. Della was in the barn, I was at the house. I saw them coming from the kitchen window, and I took my time getting my coat, and went out to meet them on the porch before they could get to the door. You don't let men you don't know get between you and your house if you can help it. The taller one had a piece of paper, legal document of some kind, folded once. He held it out toward me but didn't give it over, which was a move. Let you see there's paperwork but don't let you read it. He said they were there on behalf of the Marsh family of Claremore, and that they had information leading them to believe Adela Marsh was residing on this property, and that there was a legal matter pending which required her to appear. I said I didn't know the name. He said their information was reliable. I said I couldn't speak to their information, only to what I knew, and I didn't know any Adela Marsh. The shorter one had moved out to the side while we talked, positioning himself off my left shoulder. An old move. I'd seen it before, done it before, 20-some years ago when I was younger, and that kind of thing was my line of work. I put my right hand in my coat pocket. Nothing visible, just a weight shift, just a hand where it could do something if it needed to. The shorter one stopped moving. The taller one looked at me for a while. Then he said they'd be in Harlan and they'd return. I said that was their business. They rode out and I watched them all the way to the road and around the bend before I moved. Then I went to the barn. She was in the back stall, not hiding. She didn't hide. That wasn't her way. She'd been cleaning the filly's hooves, crouched with the near foreleg up between her knees and the hoof pick in her right hand. She was watching the door. She'd heard everything. 2 men from Claremore, I said. She set the filly's leg down and straightened. They'll go to the sheriff, she said. Jim Taft, known him 15 years. He's a reasonable man. They'll tell him a woman killed her husband. They'll tell him what serves their purpose. Jim Taft is the kind of man who listens to what he's not being told as much as what he is. She was quiet. The filly was nosing at her hip, and she put a hand up without thinking, scratched the young horse behind the jaw. You don't owe me this, she said. No, I said, I don't. I went to see Jim Taft the next afternoon. Rode the 6 miles to Harlan in the cold, tied up outside his office on Sadler Street, went in and sat down across from his desk. Jim was a big, quiet man who'd been sheriff in this county for 18 years and had seen enough of people to stop being surprised by any particular thing they did. I told him all of it. Not a version, all of it. What Della had told me, what I'd seen over 3 months of watching a woman navigate a life that had been done considerable damage. The hand. 6 years. What kind of woman walks up a creek road alone in October with everything she owns in one bag? What I thought about rich families and the particular way they used legal process as a weapon when other weapons weren't available. Jim listened. He didn't take notes. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes on the middle distance, the way he always listened, like he was looking at something only he could see. When I was done, he said the 2 men from Claremore had indeed come to see him. He said what they'd told him was that Adela Marsh had struck her husband during a domestic disagreement without provocation and had fled before she could be questioned. He looked at me. I told him what provocation looked like when you could still see the shape of it on a woman's hand 4 months later. He said he'd want to speak with her himself. I said that was fair and I'd bring her. She came with me 2 days later. Sat across from Jim Taft in his office and answered every question he asked, not volunteering, but not flinching from it either. She told him what she'd told me, without apology and without asking for sympathy. Jim looked at her hand. He asked about the 6 years and she described it the way she described it to me, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting on events that had happened to someone else, because that's the only way you can talk about some things without falling to pieces. Jim thanked her and said he'd be in touch with me. Outside in the cold of Sadler Street, she said, "What happens now?" I said I thought Jim Taft was going to send some letters, and that when those letters arrived at their destinations, the Marsh family was going to understand that pursuing the matter further was going to cost them more than it gained them. She looked out at the street. Harlan in January, the kind of cold that makes the town look old, smoke from every chimney, a few horses standing at the rail with their rumps to the wind. He might not, she said. He might not. Then what? I said, then we'll handle it when it comes. She turned and looked at me. I don't know what she was looking for in my face. Whatever it was, she seemed to find enough of it. All right, she said. Jim Taft did write the letters. He told me so in March, ran into me at the feed store. He said the Marsh family had not responded, and he didn't expect them to. He said there were things that decent people understood about other decent people's business, and he let that be the whole of it, and I thanked him and bought my feed and drove the wagon home. Spring came the way it always does in that country, not quick and not clean, but real and working. something pushing up from below whether the cold wanted to let go or not. The snow came off in February, and March brought it back twice, and April finally meant it. The creek went high and loud, and the willows came green before anything else, and the horses were restless the way horses get when the ground starts to give off warmth, that first faint smell of live earth, and they know something's changing. The filly Della had named her Morning, which was not the kind of name I'd have given a horse, but which suited her better than anything I would have come up with, was 4 months old and had started to develop character. You could see what she was going to be, the shape of the horse inside the foal, and what she was going to be was sound and willing and smart. Della was already handling her daily, building the foundation, and the filly followed her around the paddock like a dog. I got the south field turned in April. Della drove the second team. She knew how, she'd learned somewhere. She didn't offer where and I didn't ask, and she handled a team the same way she handled everything, with the confidence of someone who's done a thing enough times that it lives in the body, not the head. We did the whole field in a day and a half. Last spring I'd done it in 4 days working alone and had been stiff for a week after. I thought about that sometimes, the arithmetic of it, what the place had been and what it was. A ranch runs better with 2 people, that's just the truth of it, the plain practical truth. 2 sets of eyes, 2 sets of hands, the work covering more ground and the load not breaking anyone back. But it wasn't only the arithmetic. Something else had shifted that I couldn't put numbers to. A ranch that's been one person's for too long starts to take on the shape of that one person, his rhythms, his blind spots, his particular ways of doing things that may or may not be the best ways but are his ways, and he stopped questioning them. She brought different rhythms. I found myself doing things differently, small things, because watching her do them her way made me think about whether my way was actually better or just familiar. Sometimes it was better, sometimes it wasn't. The day we finished the south field we were coming back across it in the late afternoon, and she stopped walking and turned and looked at what we'd done. The whole field turned, dark and even in the low light, about 20 acres. I stopped beside her. She said my father farmed. I waited. Not like this, smaller, dryland wheat mostly. She looked at the field. I used to follow him on the rows when I was small, before he decided farming daughters was a waste of time. She said that last part without bitterness, just accurate, the way you report a fact about weather. I always liked the smell of turned ground. I looked at the field. The smell was there, all right, the good, cold, rich smell of earth opened up, the smell of something that's been closed for months finally getting air. Me too, I said. We stood there another moment and then walked back to the barn. But I thought about what she'd said about following her father on the rows when she was small, before he decided she wasn't worth the following. And I thought about the woman who'd learned to drive a team somewhere, some place where the skill was handed to her or taken by her, and how that woman had ended up here on this piece of ground that smelled like her father's farm, and how there are things that circle back around in a life that have nothing to do with planning. May, a Thursday evening, the sun still up past 7 for the first time since before Christmas, the yard warm enough that I'd taken off my coat for the first time all year, the horses out on fresh grass and wanting nothing from anybody. We'd eaten supper and I was on the porch with a cup of coffee, and she came out with her tea and sat in the other chair. She'd started doing that, coming out in the evenings when the weather allowed, sometime in late February or early March. I hadn't commented on it and she hadn't made a thing of it, just started doing it, and here we were in May doing it. We sat there watching the horses in the far pasture, and there was the meadowlark somewhere in the grass doing his evening business, and the creek going quiet now that the runoff was past. She said I was married at 19. I didn't say anything. My father arranged it. Thomas Marsh had land and money and he was 32, and my father thought it was a fine situation. A pause. It was fine for about 3 months. I watched the horses. I didn't know what I was walking into. Nobody told me. Maybe they thought I don't know what they thought. Maybe they thought it was just going to be my life and there wasn't anything to warn me about. She held the teacup in both hands, the left hand at the bottom, the right wrapped around it. When it started, I thought I'd done something. Something I could fix if I figured out what it was. You think that for a long time. You think you're the problem. Then eventually you stop thinking that and you just try to get through. I said, "How old were you when you left?" 26. I looked at her then, just looked. She was looking at the pasture. 7 years, I said. Yes. I looked back at the horses. They were drifting toward the far fence, following the last of the sun. I said, "You found my hammer without being told where it was." She turned and looked at me. "You don't need fixing," I said. "Whatever you think happened to you, whatever you think you are after 7 years of that, you don't need fixing." Her face was very still. "You're the steadiest person on this ranch," I said. "That includes me, and I'm not a man who says things like that when they aren't true." She looked back at the horses. Then she said quietly, "I'm afraid to trust anything good." "I know that. I've been afraid since October. Every day I think, this is the day it changes. This is the day something comes from a direction I'm not looking." "Nothing's going to come at you from a direction you're not looking," I said. "Not while you're here." She was quiet. "I know that too," she said. "That's the part that frightens me." I thought about that for a while. I understood it better than she might have expected. When you've been hurt enough by the same kind of thing, the absence of it starts to feel like a trick. The safety feels like a trap. You can't quite let yourself believe in it because believing in it is exactly what's gotten you hurt before. I said, "You don't have to trust all at once. A horse doesn't trust all at once. It trusts a little at a time, and it watches to see if the trust gets rewarded, and if it does, it trusts a little more. That's not a bad system." She looked at me. In the evening light, I couldn't read her face exactly, but something in her shoulders had let go just a small amount, a fraction, like something that had been held up a long time and was being allowed to set itself down, not all at once, just a little. Just a little at a time. We sat until the sun was off the hills and the first stars were showing. Then she said good night and went inside, and I stayed out with the coffee and the dark coming down around the yard. I thought about Margaret, about the years we'd had, the good years and the hard years, because there were both, because that's what years are made of. I thought about the boy's saddle in the barn, about the space something leaves when it goes out of your life, and how that space doesn't fill exactly. It just becomes part of the shape of you, you grow around it, and after long enough you stop noticing the shape it left. I wasn't looking to replace what I'd had. A man my age, he knows enough to know that's not how it works. Every good thing is its own thing, not a substitute for another good thing. That's either a comfort or it isn't, depending on where you're standing. I went inside. June. The hay was up heavy and we were 2 weeks from first cut. The filly was starting under saddle. Della's project, her patience, her work, so slow and thorough and correct that I stopped worrying about it and just let her get on with it. I watched some mornings from the fence rail while I drank my coffee. The way she moved with the young horse, the way she gave it time to think, never pushing past the edge of what it understood, never asking for something before it was ready to give. There's a kind of teaching like that, and it's rare, and it tells you more about a person than most things. One morning in June, she came to the tack room with a letter. I was sitting at the bench restitching a broken cheek piece on an old bridle, and she appeared in the doorway and held it out. I set down the bridle and took it. The letter was from a lawyer in Claremore, representing the Marsh family. The language was formal, the way lawyers make things to sound like they haven't lost. What it said, underneath the formal language, was that in view of circumstances the family had decided not to pursue the matter and that Adela Marsh was free to conduct her affairs. It was done. I held the letter for a while and looked at it, and then I looked at her. She was in the doorway with her arms crossed, her weight on one foot, her chin up, waiting. I said, "It's done. They've dropped it." She didn't move for a moment, just held still. Then she nodded once short. I held the letter out. She took it, looked at it herself, read it through. I watched her face. Something moved in it that she didn't try to control, a kind of release, something letting go, not dramatic, just a slow easing. She folded the letter carefully twice, the way you fold something you intend to keep. Then she said, "The back section of fence near the creek. 3 posts need replacing before they rot through." I said, "I know, I'll get to them this week. We could do them together, before the hay comes in." "Probably ought to," I said. She went back to what she'd been doing. I sat in the tack room for a while with the bridle in my hands, not working on it. There was something that had been sitting on the whole ranch since October, some weight I'd stopped noticing because I'd gotten used to it, and now I noticed it was gone. Just gone. The air was different, or I was different, or both. We did the fence posts. 2 days of it, hard work. The ground near the creek tricky from all the freeze and thaw. The old posts sitting crooked in holes that had gone wrong over the years. She dug and I set, she tamped and I ran wire, and we barely talked through either day because neither of us needed to, and that was a good thing about working with her. She understood that work is its own conversation. By the second evening we had 12 new posts in, the line tight and right, and we walked back across the field in the long summer evening with the light going gold on the grass. "Coming back," she said. "I want to stay." I kept walking. "Past the fall," she said. "Through the winter if that's still all right." I thought about pointing out that she'd been answering this question with her actions for 8 months, that the answer had been plain in every morning she'd gotten up before me, and every evening she'd sat on the porch, but I didn't. She needed to say it with her mouth, so I let her. I said, "More than all right." She nodded, kept walking. That was the whole conversation, and it was enough. Haying season. 6 days as hard as any on a ranch, from before sunup to after sundown, everything in the body used and then used again. She was there for every hour of it. I ran the mower, she raked. I stacked, she drove the wagon, and she drove it right smart about the turns, patient with the team, not trying to hurry anything that couldn't be hurried. At the end of it we had the barn more than half full and a good stack outside under canvas, and a second cutting likely in August. I hadn't put up that much hay since the last year before Margaret died, when we'd had 2 hired men helping, and I was 20 years younger. Last evening of haying, after supper, I couldn't move. Sat in the porch chair with my hands in my lap looking like they belonged to someone older than me. The kind of tired that is a debt you've been paying toward all day and now the account is settled, and it hurts, and it's also, I don't know the word for it. Right. It feels right. She came out with the herb tea again. I looked at it. "Not the chest this time," she said. "The inflammation in the joints, same base, different proportions." She sat down in the other chair. "Drink it." I drank it. It was less bitter this time, or I was used to it. After a while she said, "That's 6 of us worth of hay." 5.5. 6, I counted the bales. I didn't argue. The moon was coming up big and orange over the eastern ridge. The horses were dark shapes in the pasture, settled, not moving much, full on grass and happy about it. The creek talking to itself down in the trees. Frogs. The good sounds of a ranch in summer, at the end of a hard day. She said, "I didn't know a place could feel like this." I looked over at her. "Safe," she said. She was looking at the pasture, the horses in the moonlight. "I'd had it before when I was small, before I knew there was anything else." She paused. "I'd forgotten." I set the teacup down on the rail. I said, "You made it this." She turned and looked at me. "It wasn't this before," I said. "It was a working ranch that ran well enough, and I got through the days and the seasons, and that was fine. It was fine, but it wasn't this." I stopped, looked out at the pasture. "What it is now, that's you, the things you brought to it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and put her hand on my arm. Her right hand, the good one, just laid it there on my forearm across the armrest between the chairs, easy and certain, not reaching, not tentative, just a hand placed on a man's arm in the plain way you'd place a hand on something you weren't afraid of anymore, something you'd decided about. I looked down at her hand, then I put my left hand over it. We sat like that while the moon finished coming up and went from orange to white, and the frogs went on with their work, and everything settled into the particular quiet of a summer night on the plains, the kind of quiet that has sounds in it but isn't disturbed by them. Nothing needed saying, neither of us tried. What I know at the end of it is this. I'm not going to call it a moral because it isn't one, it's just what happened, and what I made of it, and what it made of me. There was a morning in September. I can fix it because it was the first morning I could see snow on the top of the North Ridge, which puts it in the second week of September, about a year after she'd come up the creek road. I came in from early feeding in the cold. The cold was back, that particular September smell of cold and dry grass and something in the air that says the year is turning. And I came through the kitchen door slow, the way I always came through it now, and the kitchen was warm and the fire was going and the coffee was done, and she was at the stove with her back to me. She was holding the pan by its handle. Her left hand, the scarred one, the one that didn't quite close all the way, she was holding the pan by its handle, easy, without thinking about it, without the careful workaround she'd used when she first came, just holding a pan. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The filly was in the paddock outside the kitchen window, almost a year old now, good-looking young horse with her whole life ahead of her, and the North Ridge was white above the tree line, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the particular smell of a house that's being lived in by people who are at home in it. I thought, I am a man who has everything he needs. Not what I had before, different, a different shape. I'm not the kind of man who pretends otherwise, who'd say it's just as good or better or any of that. It isn't just as good. It's what came after. And what came after is its own thing, real and standing on its own ground, and I'm grateful for it, and that's enough. The things I'd lost for real, and the weight of them would always be there. But there is a life that comes after, not replacing the one before, just after, if you stay open to it, if you don't close yourself down past the point where anything can get through, and this was it. Right here. This kitchen, this morning, this woman with the scarred hand holding the pan without thinking about it. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook, and I sat down at the table. She put a plate in front of me without turning around. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Water trough in the south pen is going to start freezing at night. We should run a line from the barn before it does." I said, "I know, I'll run it this week." She sat down across from me. And that was a morning in September, ordinary if you want to call it that. Two people eating breakfast, talking about the water trough, the cold coming on. Nothing that would make a story if you told it to someone. But there is a thing that ordinary becomes when it happens between the right people in the right place at the right point in a life. I don't have the word for it. I'm not sure there is one word. It's too plain for poetry and too good for plain. She came up the creek road because she needed somewhere safe to land. She found the hammer without being told where it was. She sat in the dark with a mare who needed company. She told me the truth about herself and trusted me to do what I wanted with it, and I chose to do right by it, and she saw that I chose it, and it changed something between us in a way that has only grown since. Her hand doesn't bother her the way it used to. She says it's less stiff now that the cold has gone out of the ground, and that might be true, and it might also be something else. I think when you stop bracing for the next blow, things start to heal that couldn't heal while you were bracing. The body knows what the mind knows, and what her mind knows now is different from what it knew a year ago. She's still here. And that's her choosing. A woman with her own history and her own strength and her own will, A woman who survived things that would have finished people I've known who were harder than me looked at this man and this place and decided she was going to stay. That's not nothing. A man gets to a certain point in his life and he understands that. The choosing is the whole of it. And she chose. The gate on the south pasture works right. Has worked right since October of last year, since the morning she came up the creek road and found the hammer and handed it to me without a word. I check it sometimes in the morning. First thing before the feeding, when the frost is still on it, and the day hasn't had time to decide what it's going to be. I don't know exactly why I do that, habit, probably, or just the way a man does certain small things to tell himself the world is in order, that what he built is holding. It holds,